Return the money voluntarily, or I'm turning everything over to Dad's estate attorney. I placed the folder in the middle of the dining table. My stepfather, Grant, glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds before pushing it back toward me. Then he laughed. Across from him, his daughter Sophie covered her mouth, but not fast enough to hide her own laugh. My mother, Rebecca, leaned back in her chair. Liana, stop being dramatic. Nobody stole anything from you. Then explain why millions from my inheritance ended up paying for Sophie's house. The room went silent. Mom's expression hardened. The money stayed in the family. That sentence told me more than she realized. Grant folded his arms. You're 27 years old. You inherited more money than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. You should be thanking us for managing it properly. Managing it. That was what they were calling it. But what Grant didn't know was that I hadn't come to that table just to argue. I had come to give him one final opportunity before I made a call that could change everything. Months earlier, my father had died and left me roughly $50 million across investments, cash, and protected trust assets. I should have felt secure. Instead, I was grieving and staring at documents I barely understood. Grant stepped in almost immediately. I'll help you, he told me. Your father would want someone experienced protecting this. Mom reinforced it. Grant has handled money his entire life. Trust him. So I did. Grant presented what he described as a secure business opportunity that would preserve my inheritance while generating long-term returns. Wanting one less thing to fight about after losing Dad, I signed limited authorizations connected to the investment. For a while, nothing seemed wrong. Then Grant started avoiding my questions. Whenever I asked for performance reports, there was another excuse. The accountant is preparing them. The numbers aren't finalized. Stop worrying about every little detail. Then Sophie made an announcement. Grant and Mom had bought her a spectacular new house. I knew their finances. They could live comfortably, but they could not casually purchase a property like that. And the timing bothered me. The house had been acquired shortly after millions disappeared from the account holding my supposed investment. So instead of accusing anyone, I requested the transaction records myself. I followed transfer after transfer through company names I had never heard before. Then I opened the paperwork connected to Sophie's property. My hand froze over the page. One company name appeared in both places. Exactly the same. I stared at it until the possibility I had been avoiding became impossible to ignore. Maybe Grant hadn't made a terrible investment. Maybe there had never been an investment at all. I waited until Grant was out before confronting Mom. I found her in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I placed 2 documents on the counter. Mom, look at these. She barely glanced down. What are they? The first shows money leaving my investment account. The second is connected to Sophie's house. Her fingers stopped moving. I pointed at the dates. 3 days apart, same company. Mom picked up her coffee instead. You should discuss financial matters with Grant. I'm discussing this with you. She turned away. That was when I asked the question I had been afraid to ask. Did you know? Mom said nothing. Did you know my inheritance was being used for Sophie? Her jaw tightened. Then she made a mistake. Sophie deserved something of her own, too. I stared at her. There it was. Not confusion. Not surprise. Justification. Something of her own, I asked, purchased with money my father left me. Mom finally faced me. Liana, you inherited $50 million. $50 million. You couldn't possibly need all of it. That wasn't your decision. Grant was trying to make things fair. I almost laughed. Fair to whom? She crossed her arms. You received an enormous advantage because your father happened to leave you wealthy. Sophie didn't get that. And that makes my inheritance hers. That isn't what I said. It's exactly what you're defending. For the first time, I understood that Grant hadn't simply hidden something from Mom. She had helped him justify it. I slid the property paperwork toward her. Fine, you said it's an investment. Show me where my estate owns part of this house. Mom looked down. Grant handles those documents. Show me the agreement. Liana. The ownership documents, the business agreement, anything proving this property benefits my estate. Her silence answered me. I gathered the papers and walked out before Grant returned. Then I made a decision they weren't expecting. I contacted Daniel Cross, my father's longtime estate attorney, and sent him every transaction record I had collected. My message contained one question. Did I legally give them the power to do this? Daniel called almost immediately. Liana, don't confront Grant again until I review everything. Less than an hour later, my phone rang again. Daniel's voice had changed. I'm having my team preserve every financial record connected to those transfers. I sat upright. Why? There was a pause. Because I don't think Grant understands what your father actually allowed him to control. Before Daniel could finish reviewing everything, Sophie held her housewarming party. By the time I arrived, relatives and family friends were already touring the property. Sophie stood near the entrance, accepting compliments. I still can't believe Dad bought me this place, she said proudly. Grant was loving every second of it. He walked guests through the house, as though every room proved how successful he was. Mom stood beside him, smiling. Nobody mentioned my inheritance. Then Grant noticed me. Well, he announced loudly, look who finally stopped sulking about money. Several conversations died instantly. I walked toward him, holding the folder I had brought with me. I have one question. Grant smiled. Of course you do. What business did my inheritance invest in? Mom's smile disappeared. Grant glanced around at everyone watching us. This isn't the place. You brought up my money. His expression tightened. The financial structure is complicated, Liana. You wouldn't understand it. I opened the folder. Then explain this. I read out the name of one company that had received money from my investment account. Grant stopped smiling. I continued. That same company appears in the acquisition structure for this property. Sophie turned toward him. Dad. Grant took a breath. Some inheritance funds were used as part of the development investment. Sophie blinked. You used her money for my house. It isn't that simple. For the first time, Sophie wasn't looking at the property like a gift. Grant quickly turned back to me. You authorized the investment. You signed the documents. That doesn't answer where my ownership interest is. You agreed to let me manage the funds. People were watching now. So I gave Grant and Mom the choice plainly. Cooperate in returning what was diverted and revering these transactions, or I stop handling this privately. Grant actually laughed. Then Sophie shook her head. What are you going to do, Liana? You signed everything yourself. Grant's smile returned. He clearly believed those signatures ended the argument. I closed my folder. That's exactly what Grant thinks I signed. Daniel was waiting when I entered his office the next morning. 2 sets of documents were spread across his desk. Sit down, Liana. He pushed the first document toward me. This is the authorization you signed. Then he placed a much thicker set of papers beside it. And this is the structure your father created for your inheritance. I looked between them. Grant keeps saying my signature gave him permission. It gave him permission to make specific investments, Daniel said. It did not give him unrestricted authority over your estate. He turned several pages toward me. Major transactions still had to serve my financial benefit and satisfy the protections built into the inheritance structure. Grant had apparently treated my signature as permission to do almost anything. It wasn't. Your father was very deliberate about this, Daniel continued. He worried that grief might make you vulnerable to pressure after he was gone. That hit harder than I expected. Dad had anticipated the exact situation I was sitting in. Daniel pulled another document from the file. And we've traced the money. He showed me the sequence. My inheritance account. The supposed investment entity. A company connected to Grant. Then the structure used to acquire Sophie's property. I stared at the page. So what happens now? That depends on you. Yesterday, I might have hesitated. I didn't anymore. Challenge the transfers. Daniel nodded. And protect whatever they haven't moved yet. That decision changed everything. Formal notices began going out to the financial institutions connected to the disputed transactions. Grant's authority over the relevant structures was challenged, while Daniel's team moved to preserve the assets and records. My phone started ringing before I even left the building. Grant. I declined it. Then Mom. Her voicemail arrived seconds later. Liana, please think about what you're doing to this family. Another call. Sophie. Then a message. Are you seriously trying to take my house away? I didn't answer. I was still sitting with Daniel later, that afternoon, when his assistant suddenly entered. Daniel, confirmation just came through. She handed him a document. He read it, then looked across the desk at me. The first financial restriction has taken effect. My phone lit up again. Grant. This time, I knew why he was calling. The man who had laughed at my choice had just discovered that laughing was the last thing he did, while he still controlled the situation. 3 days later, Grant and Mom sat across from Daniel and me in a conference room. Grant wasn't laughing anymore. Daniel placed a series of transaction records on the table. My team traced the transfers from Liana's inheritance account through the investment entity into a company connected to you, and from there into the structure used for Sophie's property. Grant leaned forward. It was an investment. Daniel remained calm. Then show us Liana's ownership interest. Grant said nothing. The deed, equity agreement, profit participation, anything demonstrating that Liana's estate received the economic benefit you claim. Grant looked toward Mom. She lowered her eyes. That silence finally exposed what had happened. The money hadn't disappeared because Grant made one terrible business decision. He had used companies and an investment structure to move inheritance funds toward a property that ultimately benefited Sophie. And Mom had known enough to support it. Grant pointed toward the documents. Liana signed authorization. Yes, Daniel replied. Limited authorization. He opened my father's estate documents. Her father specifically structured these assets, so major transactions remained subject to protections requiring them to serve Liana's financial interests. Her signature did not give you unrestricted control. Mom looked at me. You knew. No, I said. Dad knew. That was the part Grant had never anticipated. My father had understood me well enough to know that after losing him, I might trust the wrong person simply because I didn't have the strength to fight. So he had created protections before I ever needed them. Grant tried one last argument. We kept the money in the family. I looked directly at him. My father's inheritance wasn't yours to redistribute. The disputed transfers entered formal recovery proceedings. The remaining protected assets were moved beyond Grant's control, and he lost every financial role he had held over my inheritance. Sophie's property became part of the dispute surrounding the diverted funds. Keeping it would require a legitimate resolution, whether unwinding the arrangement, refinancing it with lawful funds, or addressing it through the recovery process. The luxury gift Grant had proudly shown, everyone suddenly came with consequences. And the social fallout happened quickly. Relatives who had attended Sophie's housewarming learned why I had confronted Grant that night. The story was no longer that Grant had generously bought his daughter an extraordinary home. People knew whose inheritance had helped finance it. Sophie called me afterward. "So you're really going to let them take everything from me?" "I'm recovering what belongs to me," I replied. "But I didn't move the money." "No, and I'm not trying to punish you." She went quiet. "But I'm also not paying for your life." That ended the conversation. Mom tried something different. She asked to meet me alone. "We can fix our family without lawyers," she said. I looked at the woman whose approval I had spent years trying to earn. "You had that opportunity before I called Daniel." Her eyes filled. "I'm your mother. And you knew where Dad's money was going." She couldn't answer that. Our relationship didn't disappear overnight, but it changed permanently. I stopped allowing guilt to substitute for trust. If Mom wanted a relationship with me, rebuilding it would require time and accountability. Grant got an even clearer boundary. Any communication concerning my inheritance went through Daniel. The man who once told me financial documents were too complicated for me now had to communicate with me through my attorney. I hired an independent financial advisor and removed my mother and stepfather from every financial role in my life. Most of my father's protected estate remained conservatively invested, while the disputed transfers were handled through the proper process. For the first time since Dad died, I stopped seeing the inheritance as the burden that had divided my family. I understood what he had actually given me. The $50 million mattered. But the protections around it mattered even more. Dad had known that money could attract people who believed my quiet personality meant I could be controlled. He made sure being trusting didn't mean being defenseless. Grant laughed when I gave him one choice, until one phone call reminded him that my father had left me more than $50 million. He had also left me the power to protect it.